we've discussed various topics in the past. This episode or session, we wanted to talk a little bit about your personal experience with nutrition and metabolic health, and particularly about your thyroid condition and how you've dealt with that. Most of my conversation's been advocating reducing carbohydrates, but there's clearly challenges with that. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Yeah, that's indeed a bit of a challenge for me. As mentioned in our previous podcast, I discovered that when I was 16, and that kind of brought a lot of challenges and ups and downs. And because I'm a person who doesn't like, I'm always worried about the weight and everything. I was thinking, oh, this means that my metabolism it's very slow, because we were talking here about the hypothyroid, where your metabolism is actually slower than normal, and particularly Hashimoto. And Hashimoto thyroid, apparently, looking at the studies, it's very common. Especially in women, and that's due to stress, due to genetic factors. And what does this mean is that on a long term, your thyroid is being attacked, and then it lowers a lot. It's not functioning properly, so your metabolism slows. Therefore, I was always conscious about my weight, and I started looking online, right? The typical 16 years old teen who would look online and look for diets and all those things. So I started out realizing reducing carbs, but that's just because I'm not a person who likes rice or pasta. So I was just reducing those. But I realized that every time I was doing that, and every time I was under a certain weight, I had some health issues, such as I was developing even pre-diabetes. I was developing even losing my period, and all those stuff. So I guess for women, it's in general more difficult to deal with that. And that's, again, I just want to stress that I'm just talking about my personal experience. That's what happened to me.
Do you have a quick, just to ask a question, do you have a sense of where your carbohydrates were? They talk about percent of calories from carbohydrates, or grams per day, per body weight, things like that.
Yeah.
Were you way low, sort of low?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually wanted to talk about this because everybody is saying low carbs, but what do we mean when we talk about low carbs? Because of course, vegetables, fruits, they do have carbs as well. So when I'm referring to low carbs, I'm always referring to refined, such as sugar, such as alcohol, such as grain, bread, rice, not brown rice, but rice. So that's what I'm talking about. And when it comes to grams, everybody is saying low carb, and there's a lot of research there, and they're talking about different percentage. Some of them, the keto people are more like under 10%, others are under 20. But I guess for each individual depends on their health, depends on metabolism, depends on their activity level. I know for sure that if you're an athlete and you need to perform at a certain rate, when you talk about lower carbs, for you maybe it would be under 40. But if it's an active person, if you really want to enter into ketosis, we're looking for a certain period of time, less than 10%. How I'll measure that? That's the challenge. And that's a great question, because everybody talks about these 30 grams, 20 grams, but how will you measure that? And to be honest, it didn't occur to me how to do that up until I actually recently wrote to you and to my personal trainer and see, hey, how do you calculate that?
Right.
Because in my head was, oh, and I can provide you with some an example of a diet and what's for me low carbs, and I was like, oh, that should be low carb, but I've never measured.
Okay,
but
let me go back a bit. You said you were concerned about your weight at age 16. Mm-hmm. Now that's pretty young. I mean, at least on the guy's side, we're running around in sports and this and that, and weight creeps up on us later, although in America, more people younger. But so how, you're still dynamic and growing at 16, you just started gaining weight, or it seems like a little young to have problems, although more in America are.
Yeah, this was discovered actually with my mom. She was always worried about the fact that we didn't start our period, for example, constantly. So then this raised some questions, and of course this raised us the question if we need to see an endocrinologist. And then we were diagnosed, both my sister and myself, with this disease, which they always like to say, doctors like to say, it's the rich hidden disease, because you don't have those real symptoms, but then it's pretty difficult to challenge it, and it's for the whole life. So that's how I discovered. And then, of course, for us to have our functions working properly, we had to take some medicine, which in my case actually affected on water retention. So people who suffer from thyroid, in general, they're prone to retain more water. Okay. But these types of medicine who are trying to actually find a solution for other health problems that we had made me retain a lot of water. So I looked puffy, I looked a bit chubbier.
No fun for a teenager, right? No
fun, of course, for a teenager in high school. Everybody want to be on top of the class, right? And people are making fun of you because we're at that age when we don't understand what's happening. Yeah. So that's when it started, right? And sometimes it can be dangerous. You need to see a limit, because you can go into the other extreme and starve yourself. It was my case, but you can go into another limit, starve yourself and say, hey, what's going on there? And then you slow even more the metabolism and so on, right? And on a long term, this actually can bring extra pounds, extra kilos.
Does the doctor then measure a certain level of a thyroid hormone? Or, I mean, I don't know the biochemistry of the thyroid interactions with other organs in the hormone system, but they're measuring you're low on this level and it should be that level. And that's influenced by your diet as well, I guess.
Yes. Yes. Actually, it's always recommended to test twice, sometime one in summer, and I'll explain why, and one in winter. Summer, because when it's actually warmer, we need to reduce the dose of the medicine I'm taking every morning so that I control my hormones and metabolism. And then in winter, because it's colder and we actually not burning so much calories because we're staying more inside, we eat a bit heavier meals, then we need to increase the dose. So we test our TSH level, which is the hormone, but that can be tricky because most of the doctors, especially here in North America, in Canada, they just test the TSH on a plan that is funded by the government of Canada. And if that's okay, they will say, oh, we don't go further. But TSH is actually composed, and once we see that the TSH is in a good level, we need to make sure that we test also T3 and T4, which are the hormones that are actually helping our thyroid to work properly. Therefore, in Romania, we did test T3 and T4 as well. And even if your TSH is good, this doesn't mean that your thyroid works properly. Works good, and it's good because you have that under control with the medicine that you take every single day for life, in my case. And then, but you can have your level of T3 and T4 not functioning properly. So that will tell you actually more about your thyroid. So that's how you test, and that's how the doctor knows how to adjust the doses.
You said vitamin D had a role in this with weather, because in the summer you're getting a lot more vitamin D. How does that impact? I mean, it's a hormone as well as a vitamin, right? So
exactly. So, but for the TSH, they will also test vitamin D, because people who suffer from thyroid, especially Hashimoto, they tend to have a lack of vitamin D. So therefore, in summer, we have more sun. It also depends on the place where you live. We have more sun, and also the sun that is in the summer, it's absorbed differently than the sun that we have in the winter, even if there's sunny days, right? So I always test also vitamin D. So if your vitamin D is low, which mostly happens in cases of people who suffer from thyroid, then you feel tired, you feel sluggish, you don't feel with energy. So every time I feel that, I always test vitamin D, and also iron, because iron It's also pretty related with the thyroid. People who suffer from thyroid do suffer in general of the lack of iron, because we are not able, our body, due to the hormones problems, it's not able to absorb properly the iron. So that's another thing. So whenever you feel tired, whenever I feel tired, I always ask for the iron to be tested and vitamin D. But it's also kind of a package that comes together: the TSH, the hormone levels, estrogen, progesterone, and then iron and vitamin D.
It sounds complicated, but of course it's a long-term condition, and you want to understand what's going on. We've emphasized before, we're not doctors, we're not giving medical advice, but there are people who are doctors who do give medical advice. And you'd mentioned this Chris Kenner, is it Kenner? Krenner, that you had, I'd sent you a note. He was on a panel at one of those ancestral health conference, and you really liked him, went to his website, and you've been reading more and watching more of his work.
Yes, I just loved him. So thank you so much for sending that to me. And the reason I'm saying that, it's actually one of the few who actually tackle this problem, because everybody's saying, oh, low carb, yes, that's the best solution. Yes, but not for everybody. And he was actually the only one on the panel explaining why is that. He was actually mentioning that we have to make a distinction for pregnancy, for athletes, for people who are suffering from thyroid. So apparently, if we're going into the people who are suffering from thyroid, low carb diet, which we're explaining what we mean by that: no rice, no pasta, really under 30 grams per day, can actually affect our thyroid, meaning that people who are suffering from thyroid, they tend to have the insulin really low in general, just because their body is not functioning properly. So when we have the insulin really low and we even more reduce the carb, then we have such a big drop that we can actually affect our T3 and T4, which are the hormones that I mentioned before, that helps us help our thyroid to improve. And then we're doing even worse than better. We're slowing even more our metabolism. And then on the long term, we'll actually go into having extra and adding extra pounds. So that's really challenging for people who are suffering from thyroid. And he's actually saying that it's good and recommended to go around 50 grams, especially if you're an active person. And when I talk about 50 grams, I should say that that's more or less a slice of bread every day in the morning, to go on that, so that your levels of insulin won't drop drastically. Okay. That wouldn't apply for a person who probably won't have any issues with thyroid, because as we mentioned, and you talk a lot about this, your insulin level goes up, and that's how we add extra pounds. But for us, it's the reverse. And also, he mentioned the gut. People who suffer from thyroid, they do lack some enzymes and some gut flora. That's the reason we always have problems with the stomach, digestive, constipation. Therefore, if we take out the carbs and we go on a low diet, then we will get to a point where our microflora and the gut, it's going to be even more affected, because we as person who suffer from thyroid, we have these consequences. We're always cold, we have digestive problems, our enzymes are not working properly on the stomach. So then it's going to get actually even worse for our digestive system. So he's recommended more or less 50 grams, which brings us to a slice of bread per day in the morning, which honestly, I don't think it's too much.
But there's carbs in vegetables and fruit. And exactly. I mean, nobody that I read recommends bread for whatever reason, or so there's controversy about that. But you're saying some carbs, and again, you get that there's carbs in vegetables and stuff too. Yeah. The microbiome, let's come back to that. That's great. I mean, there's recommendations of fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, other things as adding diversity, and kefir. But so I looked at this and looked for some sort of pushback or other side on this, because my low carb fortress was being attacked reasonably. So I found Stephen Finney at Verta Health, and he has a post on this, does keto make thyroid worse? He was arguing that going into low carb or keto his argument was it makes it more sensitive. So being insulin resistant is bad, but insulin sensitive is good, where your system reacts. So he was saying the smaller amount of thyroid hormones might be more active. So even though they're lower, they're doing more work. And if I've got that right, I can post a link, obviously, to both here. But first off, everyone's different. Everyone is biochemically different. Our microbes are different and so forth. But he was saying it might, he said there's no study showing damage to thyroid from low carb, but your N=1 is your study, your personal experience. And people have, it's anecdotal, but it's actually what happened when you reduced your carbs. So the question is, did anything else happen, or do you experiment with this month by month and learn new things? I'm really curious.
Yeah, so you're right. But again, as we mentioned before, everybody has its own. So when we talk about low carbs, I love those studies, but then what I don't like about them is that nobody talks about exactly what does this mean? What type of carbs are we talking about? You need to look into your health history. You need to look into your activity level, because for an athlete to perform maybe 20% grams, it's actually really low, because you need to get your energy. A person who runs a half marathon, I don't think he will survive on a keto diet, honestly. And I don't think it's healthy. And actually, Chris Cranner had a study saying that this will, on a long term, if they do that, will actually add, there will slow their metabolism and do extra pounds, right? So as you mentioned, there's a lot of debate, but I think this needs to be tailored when we talk about low carbs according to each person.
And just a footnote, your activity level is significant. I remember someone saying, I remember talking to, when I was with you, talking about a 5K, and you said 5K, that's nothing.
That's
so,
nothing.
I mean, you run every day, or how many kilometers do you run a day or a week on average?
So I try to combine, actually. I consider myself to be not very active, but an active person. So I try to run 3 times or 4 times for my cardio a week, more or less 30, 40 minutes, which brings me to 5K, just because I have some lower back pain and I don't want to push it too much. And then the other days I do twice per week strengthening exercise. I train with Sarah, our personal trainer, whom you all met. Yeah. And then another day, which would be the 7th one, I'll just do the yoga, stretching, or Pilates. I tend to walk more than 10,000 steps per day. I'm around 12 steps per day, but my limit would be, the least I do, it's 10,000. So I reach that every day. So I do consider myself pretty active.
Yeah, let me, I'm sorry to keep interrupting. You used to be heavier, 2000, whatever, and you were less active then, or was it dietary? Because I remember you've got a twin sister, and your twin sister was slender, and you were, not overweight, I thought, but heavier than your sister. And you said you changed. I mean, you weren't as active then, I guess.
I was, I should say I wasn't. That's true. This started really intense activity with 20, I think I was 29 at that time. When I started to have more conscious about sports and the importance of that. But I wasn't also conscious about so much my diet. So I was eating more sweets at that time. I was eating more carbs without realizing, honestly. And, living with my parents, they're always feeding you. I'm like, eat, and all those types of things, right? But I was better in terms of the other problems that now I'm affected. To come back to your question, when I saw my nurse practitioner, she actually mentioned to me that I was saying, look, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, I don't know what's happening, but I realized that when I go to a certain weight, I do tend to have some issues. And she mentioned that this is because of the thyroid, this is because we need to incorporate more carbs on the diet, and everybody has its own, and it has to be tailored. And also she mentioned something interesting, very interesting. And she asked me, why are you so obsessed with this? And I explained to her, right, why are you so obsessed with these kilos, to be just in this kilo if you saw that under these certain kilos you are affected? And I mentioned to her all my history, as I was talking to you, and I'm talking to you right now. And she actually had an interesting point, and she said, well, that's actually a more complex issue to tackle, and maybe that's not just about talking with a dietitian or a nutritioner, but maybe also chatting with a stress management therapist, because that goes maybe not an eating disorder, but that panic of not gaining weight and then affecting other things, and on a long term you do more bad than good.
That's a culture. I mean, talked about in the past on earlier posts. There are a couple books against dieting and obsession with weight.
Yep.
And also there's a cultural thing that now women are supposed to be really, really skinny. And that's, in the movies and television, these ultra thin people, or the Disney princesses are ridiculously small waisted. But when you look back in time, the women were heavier in the paintings,
especially the Greek ones.
Yeah. So she's saying you should see a psychiatrist about, why are you obsessed?
Yeah. But I guess it's the pressure of the society. It's also the pressure. Well, for me, it's just, I've always wanted to be like that. I think it's, those typical, you have brown eyes and you want to have green eyes, or you have green eyes or you have straight hair and you want to have curly hair. So we always want something that we don't have, right? So I guess for me, that's always an issue. Was always an issue. I want to have something that I don't like. For example, my sister always wanted to be a little bit chubbier because she was always skinnier, right? So I guess that's type of thing. I guess it's also the society pressure, social media. But for me, I think it's something that makes me feel good, because feeling lighter makes me feel good. And that's the reason I was actually talking to her and talking to my dietitian back in Spain, asking, hey, listen, it's very frustrating for me because I'm trying to do this and I feel good on my body, but then, I have to be careful on the other side. And that's, I guess, the people with thyroid, it's what they need to battle. And it's frustrating, but as they mentioned as well, it's a process. We have to be aware of the other health issue. And the nutritional, my practitioner, the nurse practitioner, told me, in my practice, I saw a lot of people who look fit, but and they look healthy, they eat healthy, but if we have to run a blood test, they're not healthy, their body's not healthy at all. Meanwhile, I saw people heavier, which are healthy. And long story short, I will also do my blood test as usual every year. I run the whole process, and up to now I was lucky. But for my lack of vitamin D, as mentioned, and iron, the rest was okay.
Yeah.
But
blood test, by the way, I did a blood test. I found a company, Own Your Labs.
Mm-hmm.
They send you the deal for it, and it was like $100, and they tested a whole metabolic panel. I tested my insulin resistance, which they don't, insulin levels.
But we're talking about AC1 or something like that.
Hemoglobin A1C, but also insulin directly, because people generally test blood glucose levels, but not insulin. So you could get yours tested every 6 months. Maybe, anyway. But so you've been reviewing all this, and I appreciate your thoughts on it. Any conclusion, or where do you go next, or you're reading more, learning more? What's next on your journey in this regard?
For me, it's actually, I just learned recently how to look at those carbs. And also I would like to tell everybody that, and we mentioned that when you start the diet and you're looking all those things and guidelines, just don't go with what's there. Just go on your personalize to your blood test, personalize your activity level, and you can work with a dietitian on that, and also with your doctor. That's really important, so that they can actually make a personalized diet, looking at your history, looking at everything. And now when everybody talks about low carb, just see what this means. Like, how do you measure? What does this mean? Where do you take those carbs from? So that you're not affected on the other side. And don't get obsessed like me with food, which it's difficult to put in practice, but try. It's very hard to kind of train our mind rather than train our body, right? We always say that. So it's a process day to day, but I guess it's just take it easy, and be aware always of how do you feel and your blood test.
And we've talked about carbs, but there's simple and complex carbs. You talked about resetting your sugar taste buds. So you still enjoy sugar, but a little less sugar goes further in terms of dark chocolate. And so the chocolate doesn't have to be as sweet.
Just this, to be honest, nothing else. Well, unless, of course, everything here we all know in Canada, everything has sugar, but more than we have in Europe. But rather than that, I don't eat donuts. You won't see me eating a donut or biscuits or stuff like that. So,
I had a fun story. I just, from a presenter, talked about carrot cake. He says,
Oh,
carrot
yeah.
cake, why would you have carrots in a cake? They don't add to consistency. They
Yeah.
don't do this or that. Well, it turned out hundreds of years ago, sugar was so expensive, carrots were the sweetest thing people had access to.
How
So
about
carrots were
banana?
put in cake for their sweetness. And so I'd like to find authentic, medieval carrot cake to see how it is, because I love carrot cake, but now it's just so sweet. I can't stand it any normal. I'm sure there's a keto carrot cake somewhere, but interesting on this history. Yes, lots more sugar because it's so cheap and put into so many foods for various reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to preserve and all those things, right?
As well. Well, Marina, thank you very much for this discussion, sharing your story. And I look forward to look forward to talking to you next time.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you.